Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles is out today, and I'm here to help you navigate all the jobs in this game and ultimately decide which ones you should be chasing down first with a tier list. The Ivalice Chronicles version of the game does actually switch things up a little from previous versions, so even if you've played the original FF Tactics or War of the Lions, you might be surprised by some of these placements. I have spent countless hours with numerous versions of FF Tactics over the years, including the Ivalice Chronicles, with many thanks to Square Enix for gifting it to me, but as with any tier list I make, this video is built in the hopes of bringing us all together and finding our favourite ways to play our favourite games, whilst also embracing our differences in what our favourite ways actually are. So if you have a different take on this tier list, I encourage people having different takes from me. So by all means, please comment below, and as usual, I'll be posting some other people's opinions in addition to my own, so you can get a few alternatives too, thanks to my Patreon members. So I'm only going to be discussing the general jobs available to any character in this video, and not the unique ones associated with story-based characters, both because they're generally pretty overpowered and I also don't want to go into spoiler territory, but you're welcome to comment below if you'd like to see that video. I used this list on Tier Maker to make this video, and it is weirdly missing the Thief job, so I'm just going to add that in myself, and I'm also not going to be putting in the Dark Knight or Onion Knight jobs because they were in War of the Lions and they're not in the Ivalice Chronicles. So keep it cute and keep it classy in the comments, and with that, let's just get stuck in. So let's start with the Squire, which, let's face facts, one wouldn't expect a lot from the job you start the game with, but you'd be surprised at what you can get out of a Squire. In terms of stat growth, as when you level up in Final Fantasy Tactics, what job you are when you level up determines what stats you gain from it. It's pretty meh, which can be said pretty much of anything this job brings to the table in terms of combat potential. However, what this job does better than any other in the entire game is grinding. The JP boost ability is a given in this regard. You'll be reluctant to take it off for the majority of your playthrough of FF Tactics because it's so valuable, but there's another active ability that's just as useful, if not more. Focus is an action the Squire or job carrying Squire abilities that increases the user's physical attack for the remainder of the battle, and more importantly gives XP and JP to the user without having to interact with any other character. If you wanted to grind out JP and XP for any reason, you could just spam this move over and over again until you got as much as you needed. Just be careful doing this, as enemies outside of story battles level up with your highest level character, so you might not have the gear to keep up with their level, and story battles don't, so you'll overpower them very easily, thereby potentially ruining the game for yourself in doing it. Outside of this though, you're very unlikely to use a Squire in regular combat. Sure, Throw Stone is useful as a weak way of hitting an ally that's confused or asleep, etc. Move +1 is good enough until you get better movement options, and certain characters that have unique additions to the Squire job are really strong for it, but they're for another video. But that's just it with Squire. Anything it can do, something else can do better, so it's going to start by going right in at the bottom. The same, however, is absolutely not true of Chemist, which you also start the game with, but where you're unlikely to use Squire much outside of grinding, Chemist has access to some of the best abilities in the entire game. Items in Final Fantasy games are usually a dime a dozen, but due to the mechanics in FF Tactics, they're actually really valuable. Magic in this game is a charge time, so you don't get the effects of it immediately when you select it as an option. So, if you're wanting to heal a hurt party member or raise up a KO'd one, there's space for things to go wrong in between. Now, cast times have been reduced in the Ivalice Chronicles, which does shuffle around some other jobs in this list from previous versions of Tactics, but having the ability to use items instantly, and if using the Chemist itself or the throw items ability learned from it, at range is incredibly valuable. This doesn't even begin to include Chemist's most valuable ability, Auto Potion. Something that's always been a bit of a throwaway in previous FF games, Auto Potion here has a strong chance on taking damage to use the weakest potion in your inventory to heal yourself instantly. Now if you make sure that the only potions in your inventory are the strongest ones currently available, like X potions, I'm sure you can imagine just how powerful that is. Even in combat, Chemists are surprisingly useful. If given a gun, certainly some of the magic-based ones obtained later in the game, a Chemist can weaken enemies in preparation for a stronger attacker to come clean up. And there's a shocking number of undead enemies in this game too, at which point a quick Phoenix down being thrown at them actually provides the strongest option you have at your disposal. Of course, I've not even begun to mention Treasure Hunter and how useful that is throughout the entire game, and having a Chemist in your party takes away the need to equip abilities like Throw Items or Treasure Hunter. It's S tier. It's a godly, I think it's a godly job. The ability to heal your allies instantly at range without having to worry about charge times or anything. It makes a lot of other jobs that have healing capabilities fairly superfluous in a lot of ways, and you start the game with this. Knight is an odd job for want of a better term. Stat growth wise, it hits all the right notes for a physical attacker, HP and attack, can't go wrong with that, and some of the Knight swords like Excalibur turn out to be some of the strongest in the whole game. And yet, I still find I don't like it. For starters, Knight is slow, which is not a great trait to have in this game, and the rend mechanics are fine. Breaking your opponent's weapon or armor should be great in theory, but the accuracy rates for it aren't very strong, and there are much better examples of tampering with an opponent's equipment than rending it, whether it be stealing it with a thief or using an ability that does damage at the same time as destroying it, like you could with Meliadul or Orlando. The fact that Knight's primary use is one that doesn't deal damage, and yet they rely on physical damage as their primary stat, makes Knight just feel a little disjointed in a way that a lot of other jobs don't. Equipped swords is nice, and parry's okay, but it doesn't cover Knight swords, and realistically, you can use other jobs that give you many of the same benefits that Knight can from a job perspective. So while it's decent enough in the early game, you'll likely swap it out for better options later, so I'm happy to put it in the questionable tier. Archers are meant to be great at ranged attacks, given the obvious nature of being a bow wielder, and they most definitely are one of the jobs that benefit most from the changes made to the Ivalice Chronicles version of FF Tactics, but the linearity of their use makes them difficult to apply efficiently. Aim is the one action ability that archers have access to, and it targets the tile rather than the character on it, so it's really easy to miss if you're not paying attention to the turn order, which luckily is more accessible now than it ever has been before. And because charge times have been reduced in the Ivalice Chronicles, aim can absolutely be usable in its current form. But in my opinion, I feel there's just an obvious competitor to Archer, which is Dragoon. Dragoon functions much the same as Archer through the jump ability, but Dragoon having better armor, access to double hand through the Samurai to make regular attacks really powerful, and not being on screen and therefore not targetable for the duration of Jump's charge time, just make it practically better in every way, and Dragoon benefits from the charge time reduction just as much as Archer does, which to me leaves little reason to have an Archer in the party or use aim in the secondary slot even. Now, I'm sure that people might disagree with me on this when it comes to Archer, because aim is better than it's ever been before, and it has access to some other useful abilities like concentrate and being able to hit without missing or worrying about it. I just found though that in the 2 playthroughs I've made of this game so far, because yes, I have played through this game twice already, including the Platinum Trophy run, I've just not felt a reason to ever use Archer, so I'm really sorry, but I'm going to put it in the weak category. White Mage is the first magic job on our list, and its primary function is to serve as a healer, as is par for the course in Final Fantasy. But how useful that healing actually turns out to be is questionable. As I said earlier, magic has a cast time, and that can make things problematic when you need to act quickly in response to a bad situation, even with the overall charge time reduction in the Ivalice Chronicles. As a preventative measure, casting spells like Protect and Shell in the first couple of turns of the fight can be really helpful, and one can reduce the time spent in casting further with stuff like Swift Spell learnt from the Time Mage. But the fact remains, there are other jobs that can just perform White Mage's function faster and with more efficacy. You can still cast curative magic on undead enemies like you could with a Chemist's items, but why wait on a Raise or Curaga that can miss when you can use a Phoenix Down to do the job instantly and with perfect accuracy? White magic is best used as part of an Arithmetician's kit, whether it be Holy to deal damage to multiple enemies, though be prepared to be sitting there for a while if you do this, thank God for the speed up button, or Asuna to clean up statuses that remedies can't necessarily fix from a Chemist, and it is useful for that. But White Mage's stat growth simply aren't as good as a Black Mage's overall, and one has to keep a keen eye on their Faith stat to make the most of them too. So as weird as it sounds, White Mage is actually one of the weaker healers of the bunch. I definitely wouldn't say that White Mage was bad, like it definitely has a ton of uses, and Holy is really powerful, so if you're going to use an Arithmetician, you do need to learn the white magic available to a White Mage. So I think I'm quite happy to put it in B tier. It's great early game, even if Chemist is better, so you can use it, but I certainly wouldn't say it was stronger than B. Black Mage is useful for one major aspect that most other jobs don't have, and it's something that sets it apart enough that having to deal with charge time doesn't detract from how strong it can be. A Black Mage's ability to deal area of effect damage is very strong, there's no two ways about that, and elemental weaknesses don't play as much of a role in tactics as they do in other Final Fantasy games, primarily due to how many of the enemies you encounter are human rather than monstrous, but when going through somewhere like Midlight's Deep, they are helpful. Black Mage also has a really high magic attack stat in general, both by being equipped and a stat growth, so if you want to use magic throughout the game, you're gonna want to use a Black Mage for that alone. You also get magic boost as a passive from this job, so if magic is your thing, this is where you're gonna find it. I don't think Black Mage is the strongest job for magic in the game, but you're gonna want Flare and some of Black Mage's other options to help serve that job, and given how long it takes to get to that job, Black Mage is gonna serve you very well for the majority of the game, so it's gonna go into A tier for me. Monk is crazy. It genuinely shocks me how early you get this job, considering quite how good it is. The main thing to bear in mind with Monk is that it doesn't require a weapon, because the Brawler passive that comes naturally on it just amplifies your attack stat without one, so you'll be doing great damage regardless. And this is a great point in favour of using the job primarily as well, or any other great job, because having that job equipped means not having to equip the things that make it special in your ability slots, so you're free to use other effects to compound them, like throw items or jump. Monk's abilities are also disturbingly varied as well. Aura Blast is a ranged attack with decent power, Shockwave and Cyclone deal AoE damage, and then you have healing skills that cast instantly and even restore MP as well as HP in Chakra, Cleanse and Revive. Counter is also really powerful when used correctly as well. Monk is just an absolute machine from the start of the game all the way until the end, so this is a straight god tier pick, I reckon. Thief is what you would call a necessary evil in FF Tactics. Some of the best gear in the game is acquired through stealing it, and without a thief, you're not stealing anything. The accuracy of steal is obnoxiously low at times. Seriously, it took me forever and a day to steal Marquis Elmdor's Genji gear, but having the ability to do that at all is really powerful. I'd say more so than rending it through a knight, because even if you don't use what you steal, you could always sell it or throw it at something. Poach is also exclusive to the Thief unless you equip it in your passive slot to get monster carcasses to sell, but again, that would come under necessary evil territory. It's just a shame that Thief's stats are so mediocre. Daggers aren't great for damage overall, but what they are able to do is inflict status conditions. Weapons like Mage Masher or Blind Knife can afflict the enemy with statuses, and having dual wield equipped makes that even more likely to happen. But if you've gotten hold of a ninja already to have dual wield, you're probably better off using a ninja with steel than a thief with dual wield, if that makes sense. Sticky Fingers is also useful in very select situations. It's the only way to get certain weapons more frequently, for example. So it's a great job, but also not a great one. So I'm going to put this in B tier, even though Steel is so very, very necessary. Mystic is a job that relies on inflicting status conditions to make the most of it, and has some really interesting abilities that tie into that, but there's not an awful lot else going for it. The problem with Mystic is how weak it is overall and how superfluous a lot of status conditions are in Final Fantasy Tactics. Sure, there's situations where an ability like Corruption is really good to turn an enemy undead and then throw a Phoenix down on it, but in practice you never really find you ever need to do that. I just found that a straight attack on an enemy was almost always better. What better status is there than KO'd after all? Mystic does have uses though. The Faith status given by Belief can be really helpful on a mage, Stone dealt through in duration might as well be an instant KO, and the Mana Font ability can be a really strong movement skill in conjunction with the Mana Shield ability. But by and large, Mystic is one of those jobs that's just kinda there. The pole weapons that make Mystic unique are kinda just rubbish versions of the pole arms you would have used as a Dragoon, and if you ask me, you're not likely to be attacking with a Mystic anyway. It does have some abilities, you're more likely to use it than you would a Squire or an Archer, I guess, so I'd be happy to put it in the questionable tier. Time Mage, like the other mages on this list, needs to stand out in the face of having to deal with cast times and the potential to miscast, and for the most part, it actually does. Having access to haste and hasture is enough to stop this from being a low tier pick on its own. Having access to speeding up your entire party with a multiplier rather than just a neat speed increase on like Tailwind can make for some insane combos. Time Mages do have a lot of other uses as well though. Stop is a condition you might actually want to use as it combines the effects of Immobilize and Disable in one neat package. The other attacking spells aren't terrible, and Graviga can actually be really powerful against the right enemies. If it hits, because it's not the most accurate spell in the world. And Meteor, while massively entertaining, takes way too long to cast, even with the new charge times. Teleport is an action that sounds amazing, as you could travel to any point on the map, but in testing, I found it failed more often than it succeeded, and so spending its new 3000 JP cost felt a little bit of a waste. I can't deny how useful Time Magic is though. Quick is another spell I've not mentioned yet that's really good, and Swift Spell is one of the most useful passives a mage can have, so it'd feel wrong of me to put this any lower than A tier, really. Geomancer is another odd job, much like Knight, because its ability is largely kinda useless, but unlike Knight, I actually did find I wanted to use this. This is predominantly due to their stat distribution. They're weirdly fast considering how strong they are, and dual-wielding swords like Ice Brands can actually prove really effective. They also have a bizarrely high movement stat too, so they can get where they need to go quick. I don't honestly have much else to say about Geomancer apart from you're going to want to use this at some point if for no other reason than to get its attack boost passive, but it's strangely potent at doing nothing. Geomancy really is a bit of a throwaway skill. It does very little damage and doesn't really proc its statuses nearly enough to be worth using, and yet I'm still happy to put this in B tier. I even considered putting this in A tier. Weird. If there's one job I found I used way more in this game than any other version of Final Fantasy Tactics, it's Dragoon. Now, Dragoon was never bad in the first place. Equipping double hand on the strongest spear you have is a jump in damage you have to experience firsthand to see the difference in how good this guy can be. But more than anyone else, Dragoon benefits from the charge time reduction. Well, Dragoon and a certain materia blade wielding, spiky haired dimension hopping soldier. I don't know what Square Enix put in the Dragoon's coffee when they decided to make the Ivalice Chronicles, but jump just seems to activate so much faster than it did in previous versions. And when maxed out, Dragoons can get the jump on their enemies disturbingly early in a fight. Do you see what I did there? Now, do I think this elevates Dragoon to godliness alongside the Swiss army knife that is Monk or your primary school math teacher? I don't know, maybe? I've already said why I like Dragoon so much in this game when talking about Archer. The armor's great, you've got Dragon Heart as an alternative to Auto Potion, your movement is exceptional, but you can still miss with jump, but it's not like it's instant cast, so I am going to keep this in A tier, but I think this needs further testing because it could be an S tier job. Orator is another job that's kinda like Mystic, in that it has some really interesting abilities, very few of which you'll find you actually use. Orator most certainly rewards players who want to step off the beaten path by using monsters or playing around with the bravery and faith stats of their characters, as you can recruit enemies to your own side with speechcraft, and this, in all fairness, does take them off the board at the time as well, but the accuracy is so low that I wouldn't rely on this as a combat strategy. One other interesting use for the Orator is to actively reduce the bravery of your own characters. Rafa is actually a great target for this considering how low her bravery is naturally, because it makes the most of the Chemist ability Treasure Hunter. There's certain items in the game that can only be obtained through this ability, and your chance of getting them is higher if your bravery is low, so there is another niche use for Orator there too. Outside of that though, I wouldn't put this in my regular party so to speak, same as a Thief or even a Squire for specific purposes. But they are a nice thing to have access to. I will gonna put this in questionable tier because the recruitment isn't as necessary as something like Steel, but it does have uses even if they are as finicky as they are. Summoner is another job I think got a big buff from the Ivalice Chronicles thanks to the cast time reduction across the board. The main benefit to a summoner is the fact that summons don't affect the opposing party to the one that's targeted, so for example, Titan won't catch an ally in its crossfire and Moogle won't accidentally cure an enemy. The trade-off for that has always been that summons tend to have long cast times, but between Swift Spell and the general cast reductions, I actually found I used Summoner a lot more this time around. And while it takes a while to learn all the summons, certainly one particular one, you might find yourself surprised with Summoners. So I've come to the conclusion that while Summoners were what I would have called mid-tier in previous versions of Final Fantasy Tactics, they're actually doing really well this time around. Giving them access to Arithmetics gives them a real force to be reckoned with, as you have access to practically every school of magic in the game that way. And so, where I would have put it in B tier originally, this time, thanks to the cast time reductions, I'm going to bump it up to A. Samurai is something of a strange job because you're not supposed to use it in the way you think you are. Samurai's ability listings like Double Hand and Shira Hadori, and the fact that it can equip heavy armor and katanas would make you think that the Iaido skills are physical based, but don't be fooled, because they actually scale off of your magic. You need to own multiple copies of the katanas you would use for the Iaido skills as well, as they break when they're used for it, but the abilities themselves are really quite powerful, with even the cheaper skills like Kotetsu able to deal good damage to a wide area of effect near the user. This makes Iaido a really strong backup plan for a Black Mage or similar to have a useful way to employ support tactics like Masamune's Hasten Regen, or a get off me button, so to speak. I cannot overstate how useful Shira Hadori is as well, making your parry rate equal to your bravery. So if your bravery is high enough, you literally won't take damage from physical attacks almost ever again. It's well up there with Auto Potion for best reaction skill, if not the best one if you have dedicated healers in your party. If you have the gil to supply all of the katanas you'd want to use Iaido without worrying, this is a god tier job. Otherwise, it's just A tier. But either way, Samurai is really good, so I'm actually going to put it up there with the godly tier. The ninja is undoubtedly one of the most popular jobs amongst Final Fantasy Tactics players, regardless of which version they're using, and it's easy to see why. The throw ability, realistically, is only okay. Sure, if you have a ton of gil, you could feed it into weapons worth throwing, as the dedicated items like shurikens and bombs are only remotely decent earlier in the game. But being single target, you have plenty of other options for range damage. But when you consider just how insanely powerful innate dual wield is, it's easy to forgive. Having dual wield, and therefore enabling double attacking, means having that offensive capability, alongside insane speed and movement to boot, in addition to opening up the passive slot to all sorts of options. You can put throw items on to make your ninja a mobile hospital, take poach so you never have to worry about collecting carcasses again, or simply take attack boost for a beastly onslaught. It's hard to put ninja anywhere lower than S tier. I'm sure there are arguments against it for players who use its fragility against it in a discussion such as this, and I've seen people contest ninja being at the top because the filthy casuals overrate it. But the ease of use of ninja, combined with its versatility, I can't put it lower than that. It's just that good. The Arithmetician. Never used again outside of Final Fantasy Tactics in the franchise at large, and one of the most infamous jobs in the entire game. The Arithmetician is easily one of the most breakable jobs in Final Fantasy Tactics, able to instant cast any spell from the black, white, time, or mythic spell lists that the user has learnt, for no MP, whilst also targeting anywhere on the board, providing that the targets lie within the mathematical parameters set by the arithmetic skill. This sounds scary at first, but because you're able to see what you're targeting before you cast a spell, it's actually very easy to use, and having the ability to explode the entire board, or worse, take advantage of the fact you might hit your own party through the use of elemental absorbing gear, and you have a tactical nuke on your side. That being said, the Arithmetician itself doesn't come without drawbacks. It's easily the slowest job in the entire game, and its stat growth is less than stellar when compared to other jobs, so you're better off using it as a secondary ability alongside another job, like Summoner, Mystic, or Black Mage, one able to take advantage of the powers of math. Even though I've said that the job itself is weaker, in fact, if anything, it's the weakest it's ever been in Ivalice Chronicles because other jobs have risen up thanks to reduced cast times, it's still utterly bonkers in the right hand, so it can't not be an S tier. If you've never played with an Arithmetician before, you have to see it to believe it. Next up we have the duality of Bard and Dancer, which operates similarly but differently, with male units only able to become Bards and female units only able to become Dancers. Bards specialise in buffing the party, where Dancers are more akin to inflicting debuffs on enemies. They're both pretty weak in terms of stat growth, and while their music can be really powerful, they're also locked into using it every turn, and can't take any other action without negating the effects of the song up until that point. One way I've quite enjoyed using them together effectively is to use Slow Waltz from the Dancer and Rousing Melody from the Bard to increase the party's speed while reducing the enemies, as that swing in momentum can create openings you wouldn't otherwise have gotten, so long as you're happy to only do so with 3 party members and happy to leave those abilities running, not knowing how often they'll hit accurately. Dancers have an interesting skill that doesn't suffer from this as badly, namely Forbidden Dance, which inflicts random status effects to all enemies every turn, and these can rack up pretty quickly if the Dancer is left alone, but the fact remains that by using one of these, you are effectively reducing the number of characters at your disposal. I do actually quite like Dancer and Bard though. They're certainly not game breaking and they are a little bit luck heavy, but they're quite good at racking up job points late in the game in a way that's more useful than a Squire would. And they can do what they do from anywhere on the map, which is very much a plus for me. So I'm actually quite happy to stick both of these in B tier. I wouldn't put them any higher than that because of their lack of accuracy, but I also wouldn't put them any lower than that because they are actually useful. And then finally, we have Mime. I want to like Mime so very much, and yet I just can't bring myself to. The Mime can't equip any abilities or gear, which means they're as frail as they come, but the aim of the Mime is to play copycat to the allies that act before them. And there are ways to set this up to make it really powerful, like multiple uses of an Arithmetician spell that's targeting the right things, for example. But unfortunately, the Mime copies everything, from the range of the attack to the direction of where the Mime was facing at the time, so setting these things up is often way more trouble than it's actually worth. In fact, it was so much hassle that it was a struggle to get use of it efficient enough to make footage out of it for this video. So sadly, despite it being the last job on the list, as well as the most difficult one to unlock, I'm putting Mime all the way at the bottom. It's just too finicky to use well when so many of the other jobs can get the job done, so to speak, with much less hassle. So now that my own tier list is complete, let's check out what a couple of the other guys have to say over on my Patreon. These guys are very well acquainted with the original version of Final Fantasy Tactics, so I'm curious to see how different theirs looks from mine, given that mine comes from the Ivalice Chronicles. So this tier list here was submitted by DJ Laws, who knows the original Final Fantasy Tactics very well and has given a statement to go along with it. So says, anything that's ranked B and above are all very solid. I debated about placing Summoner in A. Summons do a lot of damage to a large area but are slow. See, that's something that's really interesting because I put it in A because I feel like the Ivalice Chronicles speeds them up enough to justify putting them in A. Monks, ninjas and arithmeticians are all top tier jobs. Samurais are so versatile. Chemists are the best healer with the investment in items. Dancers can be really helpful, just hide them in a corner and let them do their thing. Mime has the potential to be broken but takes a lot to set up correctly and isn't worth it, hence the C tier. C tiers are all okay and not bad. Geomancer has great status effects depending on the terrain, but barely use them outside of specific areas. D tier, they're just kind of there. The big thing I would say for everyone is to experiment with each job and each have fun with them. Every job has its moments. I actually agree with most of these. The placements I'd be interested to hear more about. I put Mystic lower than you. I also put Mime lower than you, and I put Geomancer slightly higher than you just because of the stat growth. But by and large, I actually agree with most of what you're saying here. The only difference really is that I put Chemist and Samurai in top tier because of their versatility. Chemist, I genuinely think is one of, if not the strongest jobs in the entire game. And then this tier list comes by way of Golden Garrow, so thank you both very, very much for submitting your tier lists for this. Also, Thief I put in B because I couldn't find it in the list. Oh, I should also mention DJ Laws also put Thief in B tier on their list as well, same as I did. Great skills, but really only need one person to learn them. Squire is purely not in D because of JP up. The other one I most will say is not right is I find Mime too annoying to set up to work brokenly. It can be just as broken as Calculator, also known as Arithmetician, but takes way, way, way more setup. See, I actually agree with that statement, and I'm surprised that you put Mime that high in B tier, because yeah, it can be really busted. But a character walking around with no gear at all when they're just primed to be picked off the map by a harder enemy in something like Midlight's Deep, I'm just not prepared to do that. But by and large, it does seem like most of the stuff that we were all saying, we all kind of agree on. You've put White Mage really low on the list though, as well as Dancer, which I find quite interesting, because I understand why White Mage might be lower than something like Chemist, but I wouldn't have put it at D tier. But hey, this is why I put up these extra opinions, because it's nice to know that people have differing ones to me. So there you have it. There's my tier list for the jobs in Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. Thank you ever so much to my patrons for submitting their lists, and if you'd like to join in with future videos like this one, then please do check out the link in the description box if you want to get involved and support the channel at the same time. That's going to be all from me. I hope you guys enjoy Final Fantasy Tactics as much as I have done. It's one of my favourite games in the whole franchise, and I hope I'm doing my part in helping newcomers get into this wonderful game. Of course, like the video and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed what you've seen here today. And if you want to chat more, then come find me on Discord, Twitch, TikTok, wherever you like. I'm Joesephyr on everything. So until next time, have a great day and I'll see you soon. Take care.